Hello class, today we're in chapter 3 and we're on lesson number 2, more on the coordinate graph. And we have a cartoon here where we see a dog and it looks like an officer or someone here or a parking lot attendant who is trying to find the car, and he says he's lost his scent. Let him smell your keys again, lady. So I guess the dog's trying to find the car that goes with the keys. So let's read on. To help people find their cars in a vast parking lot, some kind of coordinate system is usually used. We have already become acquainted with a coordinate system for finding points on a graph. This system, which uses the positive numbers and 0, is limited to two directions. That's to the right and up. Now you could see on our screen we already have a different type of graph, but if we were to look just over here to this section here, right here, this is the area. I guess I have my white marker, which I do need. But the area that I'm pointing to over here, just mark it up and pointing to this area over here, we've been using this area of the coordinate graph, okay? And we're limited from the point 0, we would go to the right or we would go up, okay? So let's just go back. We'll keep our lesson there, and we go back and get my white pen so we can write here. Now, actually, I think we're going to keep the black pen because we're going to use in that graph first. So let's read on. In a parking lot, these directions might correspond to the east and north. Okay, so if we're going to the east, we go to the right. If we're looking on a map, east is to the right, and then up would be north. The location of a car on a lot could be given by saying, for example, that it is 4 rows east of your starting point and the 6th space towards the north. The coordinates of this location would then be 4, 6. So we would move over to the right, going east, okay? It would be 4, they say 4 rows, right? So we would move over to the right 4, and then we would go up 6, and that would place us right here. So our coordinate point, or our car, might be right here. Okay, so we would use a coordinate point system, or the coordinate system that we had talked about, and we had 4, 6, and we can write it down. But if we were looking, we would move to the right and then go up 6. So move over to the right 4. Now, what if the parking lot also extends to the west and south? Suppose that a car is in the 5th row west of the starting point and the 3rd space towards the south. What would the coordinates of its location be? So now we're talking south and north. Again, we're talking point of reference, and 0 is the point of reference. We went over 4 and up 6, and we ended up with our point, which is 4, 6. But now they're saying, well, what if from this reference point you had to go west? And what if you had to go south? So what would those coordinates be? Okay. If we extend the x and y axis of a coordinate graph beyond the origin and think of them as number lines, then we get the figure shown at the top of the next page, or we have right here on our screen. We have this coordinate graph, and we can see that we have negative numbers. Okay. The system we have that we have been using to locate points still works, but now one or both of the coordinates may be negative. The coordinates of a car 5 rows west and 3 spaces towards the south, for example, would be -5, -3. See, we started here, we went +4, but now we're saying, oh, we're going to go -5, so we would go in the opposite direction, and that would put us here, and then we would go, instead of +3, we would go down -3, and that would place us right here. Okay, and as we would turn over to the next page, we're going to see that. Okay. The coordinates of the car 5 rows west and 3 spaces to the south, for example, will be -5, -3, and we can see this as we turn to page 116 that we went to the west, so to speak, or going left, -5, and then we went down -3. Now, notice that the origin of this graph is at the center rather than the lower left corner. Before, we were drawing a graph that would just show us this section here, and the 0 was on the bottom left corner. So everything started there, so to speak. We moved to the right or we moved up. Now the 0 or the origin is right in the center. Okay, the graph now has 4 regions instead of 1. The regions are called quadrants. Quad meaning 4. There's 4 regions, and they're numbered counterclockwise. Clockwise, we know a clock starts at 12 and goes 1, 2, 3, and it moves to the right, and then underneath coming up and then back around. Well, we're going to go counterclockwise. Okay, which is the opposite direction, sort of like winding time backwards. Well, and the regions are called quadrants. They're numbered counterclockwise, starting with the upper right. So the one that we originally used was the first quadrant. If you look at the illustration that they have on page 116 in the left margin, those are the quadrants. So I would say this is the first quadrant, okay? And that's the first one you learned. So always remember, that's the first one. But we're not going to go down and around. We're going to go counterclockwise. We're going to go to the left, and this would be the second quadrant. And then we're going to come down over here, and this would be the third quadrant. And then lastly, and not least, would be the fourth quadrant. Oops, sorry, ran out a little writing room there. So we have the fourth quadrant. So those are our 4 quadrants. Remember, quadrants meaning 4. And always remember that the first one is the one that you learned, and that is in the upper right, okay? Upper right, right hand over here. Now, with 4 directions in which to move from the origin, it is important to remember the x-coordinate of the point is always given first. So we can go any which direction. Obviously, we have 4 quadrants to go, but if we follow our first coordinate moving in the horizontal or across the x-axis, and then we do the y-coordinate, and if we're using positives and negatives, those are the 4 different ways that we go: positive, negative, x, and y. Okay, so let's see. When I say 4 different ways, actually 4 different quadrants. There's really only 2 ways you go, but ultimately you can end up in 4 different quadrants, because you'll see when we start plotting points, you can go to the right and then up, or you can go to the left and then up, or you can go to the left and then down, or you can go to the right and then down. So, with 4 directions in which to move from the origin, it is important to remember that the x-coordinate of a point is always given first. This means that to locate the point, we begin moving either to the left or to the right. The y-coordinate, depending on its sign, then tells us how far to move up or down. Now we have an example below, and they're plotting 5 points. We have the coordinate graph. We have point A, point B, point C, point D, and point E. And we see the first one is 6, negative 2. So if we look for A, and I'm going to do it right here on our graph, we're going to go positive 6. Okay, let's write down first. I'm going to write it in black on our board. You'll still be able to see it. But we have the point 6 and negative 2. Okay, so we would move positive 6 across the x-axis and then down negative 2 down the y, okay, in the y direction. So we would have our first point, and that would be A, point A, and we would write 6, oops, comma, don't forget the comma, negative 2, okay? So that's our first point. Our next point is B, and that would be, let me write our point here. Our point B would be negative 2, positive 6. Okay, so we have the same numbers, but they're swapped. Well, where would that take us? Well, again, we move, x goes first. Remember, it's x and then y. Okay, always remember, it's x and then y. So let's go over here and move negative 2, and now we're going to go positive 6, which means we're going upward. So that would put the point right about there, and that would be point B, and we would write negative 2, positive 6. Okay, and that's a comma there. Sorry, my commas don't look so commish. Now we're going to go to point C. Point C, we have negative 4, negative 4. So it'll be -4, -4. So we would move -4 in the x-axis first. That would place here, and then we go down 4, and that would put us at -4. So C would be -4, comma, -4. Okay, so now we have letter D, and letter D would be -3, 0. Okay, so we would go horizontally. The x goes first, -3, but now we would move 0, which means we don't move off of the x-axis, and we would just put our dot there. Okay, and that would be D, and that would be -3, 0. And the last point would be E, and that point is 0, -3. And now we're going to following again. Now these seem similar, but they're really not, because we're moving x first. That means we're not moving off the y-axis. Let's say we're not moving across. We're staying at 0, but then we're going down -3, which means it would be right there, and that would be E, and that would be 0, -3. So as you can see, we've plotted the graph here. We notice that the x-coordinate of each point tells how many units to move to the right or to the left of the y-axis, and the y-coordinate tells us how many units to move above or below the x-axis. So that sounds like the wording part sounds a little confusing, but basically follow x first, then y. Positive or negative in either direction. Make sure that you're always doing the x first and then the y. As you can see, we had points, we actually have points plotted in all these different quadrants. Okay, so that is the end of this lesson.